could the modern-day Vatican stop the Roman Empire? You probably think there's absolutely no way. I thought so too. But then I realized I was wrong. Because in reality, not only could the Vatican stop Rome, but it could likely take over the entire empire. And it is actually the most probable and logical scenario. How is that even possible? The Vatican is the smallest country in the world. It covers just 44 hectares, and its population is under 1,000 people. If you dropped the Vatican into Central Park, you could fit 7 of them inside. But don't let that fool you. The Vatican's population isn't just priests and nuns. In fact, percentage-wise, Vatican is so heavily militarized that it would put Prussia to shame. The Pope keeps a standing force of 135 fully geared up soldiers of the Swiss Guard. This is an elite military unit, recruited exclusively from male Swiss citizens who are at least 174 cm tall and have actual military experience. Besides their old-school halberds, which look freaking cool on their own, they carry Glocks and assault rifles. And as if it wasn't enough, you also have to count about 150 members of the Vatican Gendarmerie, a fully armed police force keeping order in the state. On top of that, the Vatican isn't just some random piece of a city, it's a heavily fortified fortress, and its surrounding walls, expanded over hundreds of years, reach up to 15 meters or 49 feet high in some places. The Romans built massive fortifications of their own, but the size and architectural design of these walls would still completely blow their minds. Alright, high walls might repel the first attack, but how exactly is the Vatican supposed to conquer the entire empire? To put into perspective how absurd this is, you have to understand that the modern Vatican isn't 100, or 1,000, or 10,000 times smaller than Rome. It is 10 million times smaller. And yet, this city-state would be the greatest challenge the empire has ever faced. How? The Swiss probably wouldn't even have enough ammo to wipe out a quarter of a legion. But the answer has nothing to do with the Swiss Guard or raw firepower. Picture this. It's the year 384. The Roman Empire has officially converted to Christianity, and the last pagan symbols are being brutally removed from public spaces. Pope Damasus I dies, and in his place, for whatever reason, appears Leo XIV, alongside with the entire Vatican state. The people of Rome are completely blown away by the gigantic fortress that just appeared right outside the city walls. St. Peter's Basilica is currently the second largest church in the world, and just the size of it would leave the ancient Romans in absolute shock. Plus, at night, the whole fortress is lit up by thousands of blinding electric lights. Did I mention the Vatican is way more dangerous than it looks? As the global capital of Catholicism, the state is seriously prepared for attacks. You think they would just run out of power in ancient times? Well, eventually yes, but definitely not the right way. The Vatican has industrial diesel generators, battery backups in case of a blackout, and, to top it off, the roof of the massive Paul VI audience hall is covered with thousands of solar panels that would play a crucial role if the state were cut off from the Italian power grid. Those unnatural lights cause thousands of pagans in the city to instantly convert, while the Christians are convinced Judgment Day is here, and the Pope would have plenty of ways to take this psychological warfare to the next level. Just imagine the sound of church organs blasted through massive Vatican loudspeakers to the entrance. It would sound exactly like the voice from the heavens. Alright, but would sheer presentation be enough to take over the entire empire? The key here is the emperor. Even though the emperor's court has already moved to Milan by 394, news of a literal fortress appearing in Rome would force him to write back immediately. A meeting between the two leaders would be inevitable, and it would be an absolute spectacle. Surrounded by a massive crowd, the emperor arrives at St. Peter's Square to see the new pope. He's completely overwhelmed by the colossal sculpted buildings that make the Roman capital look like a doll's house. As they meet and high-five, the pope would probably say something like, "Hey man, how do you feel about theocracy? Hot or not?" Not really? The Pope would probably be expecting that answer. At this point, he would basically have 3 ways to play this out, with the third one being the most realistic in practice. But before we get to that, we have to look at option 1. It's by far the flashiest, and I absolutely love it. If the Pope was pragmatic enough, he would have a sniper stationed on one of the roofs beforehand, ready to delete the Emperor from the server with a single bullet. The shocked and terrified crowd, having just watched the ruler seemingly get struck by a thunderbolt right in front of their eyes, would see this as nothing else than divine intervention. From there, the Pope could simply announce that God has chosen a new ruler, either a hand-picked puppet or, hey, why not, himself. But what about the Emperor's personal guard? After all, they were often the ones who actually chose the emperors. They definitely wouldn't be as easily fooled as the commoners. Sure, you could send a huge chunk of them on an express trip to the clouds, but it wouldn't be that simple. These were hardcore, seasoned warriors who wouldn't just panic at the sight of firearms like everyone else. But the Imperial Guard always had one massive weak spot, which the Pope would absolutely have to exploit if his state was to survive. They were highly susceptible to motivational incentives and custom employee benefit packages. Simply put, they really like gold a lot. And guess who could offer them the most gold? That's right! The Vatican is basically one giant vault stuffed with solid gold crosses, jewels, priceless art, sacred liturgical vessels, and rare numismatic gold coins. No other candidate for emperor could gather such an absurd amount of bribe money for the army on such short notice. But what would the everyday Roman say about their emperor suddenly dying? Well, probably something like, "That's fine." You know, when you change emperors twice a year on average, you probably eventually get used to it. But there's a bit of complication. First of all, we don't really know if the emperor would actually show up at St. Peter's Square in person and just let himself get shot. Second of all, at the time, the Roman Empire actually had 2 emperors, and the second emperor was nowhere near the city of Rome, making him much harder to eliminate. This could definitely mess up with the Vatican's plans and even spark a civil war, and a civil war wouldn't exactly be an easy fight for the Vatican. Then there's the ethical side of things. The Pope might actually have some doubts whether turning emperors into human Swiss cheese is the most ethical way out of the situation. Therefore, he could choose option 2. Using his enormous authority and divine signs, like those unnatural lights at night or the horrifying sounds of cell phone ringtones, he could simply control terrified people of Rome. Over time, the Vatican would de facto become the main center of power in the state, assuming the emperor didn't go for radical solutions like a direct attack on the Vatican or an assassination attempt. However, it would be a terrible idea. A direct assault against fully geared up Swiss guards and a furious mob would certainly fail, inevitably turning into a long, drawn-out siege. Of course, after some time, the defenders would run out of ammunition, but an enraged crowd could even spark an uprising, and Christian legionaries might refuse to fight. As for an assassination, it would just result in the Vatican elite electing a new pope, who would simply pick up right where the last one left off in taking over the empire. But what if the emperor tried to pick his own guy as pope? Well, at the end of the day, the Vatican's pope would hold the true authority anyway, because let's be real, formal papal elections wouldn't mean a thing when the Vatican is literally flexing divine signs and the Romans have absolutely nothing to counter them. Alright, you are exaggerating. A lot of you are probably thinking right now, come on, there's no way it would be this easy for the Vatican. Well, it just so happens that the Vatican has 2000 years of experience in diplomacy, building influence and managing the masses. To be perfectly honest, the more I think about it, the more I realize that the Roman Empire would stand absolutely zero chance against the Vatican. In reality, this fight wouldn't even be close. The Empire's only real shot is option 3, but before we get into that, I need to show you guys something. You know, I'm a huge fan of AI-generated content. It's fascinating, aesthetically pleasing, and incredibly interactive. But yesterday, I stumbled across this channel. I'm not an expert, but I feel like creating a full 15-minute animation every 3 days is somewhat difficult, so there is a slight chance that all of these videos were generated entirely by AI. I use AI myself pretty often, but generating an entire video with the click of a single button feels just a little bit unfair. The most popular video on this amazing channel has 167,000 views and exactly 215 comments. Do you guys think we could beat that and hit at least 216 comments on this video? Just to show YouTube that maybe we prefer a slightly different kind of content than this. For example, you can let me know down in the comments how often you think about the Roman Empire. Personally, I probably do it at least twice a week. And speaking of probable, option 3 would also be highly probable. You see, modern popes might have unfortunately lost that cutthroat survival instinct for the Renaissance politics that the papal states used to be so famous for. The pope could just choose to pass on all that potential power and remain a good guy until the very end, focusing on helping those in need and sharing knowledge with the ancients to improve their quality of life. He could be an absolutely awesome dude, fulfilling the church's mission without stamping out heresy, murdering emperors, handing out bribes, and doing all those other cool things. But here's the catch. Even in that scenario, the Pope would passively gain a level of influence and authority that completely left the Emperor in the dust. The people would love him, fear him, and admire him. He would become the ultimate oracle, the true ruler shaping everyday life in the Empire. I mean, who would you rather listen to? Some clown in a crown, or a miracle worker, and the leader or messenger of God who regularly heals people and can even blast a flashlight in your face. Even if the emperor formally held on to some scraps of power, it would be the Pope, not him, who held the ultimate authority in the state. A bit of a boring way to take over the greatest empire in the world, sure, but a highly effective one. Of course, for this whole scenario to work, everything hinges on the Romans actually accepting the new Pope as, well, the Pope, instead of branding him as an alien, a sorcerer, or the Antichrist. It would also be nice if the emperors didn't storm the city immediately, because that could end really badly. But what do you guys think? Would Rome actually stand a chance? Or maybe you would like to find out how the Vatican would fare against the Mongol Empire or pre-Christian Rome? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to click the subscribe button.